By the time of For a Few Dollars More, Fistful of Dollars has become hugely successful all over Europe and in the Far East. So the budget goes up. It has a new producer, Alberto Grimaldi. Leone's got out from under this small production company called Jolly Film and is now working with Grimaldi, who was a lawyer. And you've got Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef, and suddenly they realise what they've got. So the whole campaign alters. Huge images of Clint Eastwood everywhere. Clint Eastwood had appeared in Italy, and Vittorio De Sica, the great Italian director, had said, "Behold, the new Gary Cooper." And so in Italy, he was an absolute superstar. The thing that really intrigues me, because I'm interested in graphic design as well as the movies, is, of course, in the 60s, they still produced posters and printed matter for particular territories. Now, today, you get a computer image and it goes all over the world, you know, the same poster everywhere. Maybe the lettering changes a little bit and maybe it gets customized to the local language, but fundamentally, a movie has the same publicity all over the world. In those days, each territory produced their own posters, and they very often had graphic artists who did, you know, hand-painted posters, which were then printed off. And you get really interesting graphic styles. And in a way, this collection is a history of graphics from the mid-60s to the early 70s, and how, particularly in Europe and in what was then known as the Third World, where you get a completely different set of posters. I mean, I've got a North African poster for A Fistful of Dollars, which is really interesting. Has nothing to do with the movie at all, but it appeals to that particular market. And that makes it really interesting. I mean, today, you know, the interest in posters is, oh, they're different sizes. I've got one that size, I've got one that size, I've got one that size. But basically, it's the same image, or possibly two campaigns, A and B. Then, the sky was the limit. You know, a Spanish poster, an Italian poster, a German poster, a Japanese, were very, very different. And I find that interesting. So what we're going to look at is a selection from my large assortment, my large collection of Leone-related material. And I'm going to show you some posters, some documents, some scripts and bits which tell part of the story of how these films came to be made and how they came to be distributed, how they arrived in the United States in 1967 and what happened thereafter. So these are just the greatest hits from the collection, but come with me and let's have a look at them. Okay, so we're in autumn 1965 now, and they've made For a Few Dollars More, bigger budget, much more confident, and the filmmakers and the actors have made a name for themselves, so the quality of the advertising is completely different. Here's what they call a locandina, which is a sort of like an insert made by Fiorenzi, designed, which is this image appeared on a lot of the records and so on in Italy. It's you know, Clint Eastwood gritting his teeth, three bad guys standing in the background. Sergio Leone, Clint Eastwood, Gian Maria Volonté is under his own name, Ennio Morricone, the scriptwriter. This is an Italian movie, and proud of it, and a big image of Clint Eastwood to go with it. So this would have been the small poster, and then there was a big poster designed by Gaspari, a graphic designer in Italy, of a huge picture of Clint Eastwood's face, which was the large-scale poster, a painted image of Clint Eastwood sort of snarling at the audience. Absolutely vast, iconic image, which was saturated all over Rome. So this was the small version, and the big version was Clint Eastwood's face. Clearly, this is a Clint Eastwood movie, even though dear old Lee Van Cleef has come in down the bottom here as the co-star. He himself would find himself above the title for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but he hasn't quite made it yet. It's a nice piece of artwork, I think. Fiorenzi, 1965. And that image, of course, has an afterlife in Europe. Here's the same image, but slightly more cheaply produced for a Belgian poster, French, Flemish, and the same image. And the image appeared all over album sleeves, singles, EPs. In a way, this smaller image by Fiorenzi became the kind of corporate image of For a Few Dollars More in Italy. In addition to the huge Gaspari image of Clint Eastwood's face, this painted face that would have been all over the place, there was an alternative version of the For a Few Dollars More campaign. I'm hiding myself completely. It's like unrolling a carpet, this one. And there he is, Clint Eastwood in all his glory, with a blob of blood against the wall, rather like a sort of firing squad image, as if it's a kind of Mexican Revolution movie. And there's no doubt that A, that this movie is Clint Eastwood, and B, that there's going to be quite a lot of shooting in it. Very powerful image, I think. but monochrome this time. So this would have been style B, whereas style A is the big face of Clint Eastwood. And then there's a sort of middle-sized poster in Italy, which is, it's not quite a photo booster, which is the small lobby cards, and it's not quite a huge poster, but this is a sort of middle-sized thing, and this was an absolutely classic image of Clint Eastwood from the final sequences of the film. There's no doubt who's the star of this picture. This appears all over the place, even in the United States. And then, again, it's a Italian, Spanish, German co-production, so the German poster comes out. And again, it's monochrome featuring the gun rather than the stars, and a rather different kind of marketing image. In this case, I think it's a Navy Colt on it rather than a more modern gun, but this is marketed like a sort of film noir, like a kind of thriller, rather than like a Western. So we've had the German and the Italian, and then the French again, which goes its own way, taking a version of that Clint Eastwood image with the rifle, only doing a sort of painted version of it with the bad guys on the right. And there was a big version of this as well that they produced. And again, you know, pitching the graphic campaign at different territories, that still happened in the 1960s. Now, the third co-production partner is Spain, and this is an extraordinary poster. They've changed the title, Death Has Its Price, and instead of featuring Clint Eastwood, it's Lee Van Cleef picking up a gun from the last scene, the duel sequence in the movie. Very, very strange, sort of sunny background. Van Cleef putting his foot on the baddie's hand, thus giving away, actually, the punchline of the movie. The gun lying there, but death has its price. So Clint Eastwood isn't so big in Spain. It's a strange poster, but this was the original poster when it came out in Spain. This would have been all over Madrid in 1965, autumn, when the movie opened. And then the Japanese poster for a few dollars more. So classic shot through Clint Eastwood's legs of the bad guys falling, again, giving away the ending in a way. But I guess we knew that already. For a few dollars more from behind. So instead of it being the return of Yojimbo and Bob Robertson and all that, it's Leone is on there, and it's a straight up and down poster with the smoking gun added, which is a new thing in Japan. It's almost taboo in the 50s to have actual moments of violence on the poster, but here they're almost celebrating the fact this is an action movie with lots of violence in it and brutality, and that becomes the central point, the selling point of the movie. Iconic hero and lots of shooting. In some territories, such as Ireland, where there was a kind of taboo on showing guns, you find little blobs on the posters and stills covering up the guns. So you'd have a poster or a still like this and a funny little blob in his hand, which was the powers that be covering up the armament. So by now, the macaroni western, as they call it in Japan, has really taken off. And then in '67, hot on the heels of Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More opens in the United States, and you get another Fred Ottness campaign where you've got The Man with No Name, The Man in Black is Waiting, who's added to the Man with No Name is back, The Man in Black is Waiting, and this collage of scenes from the film. So there's a strip, Dead or Alive, vertically, and here's various horizontal bits. The Dollar, For a Few Dollars More is the second motion picture of its kind. It won't be the last. Again, they knew that The Good, the Bad and the Ugly was on the way as number 3, so they were quite safe in saying that. But it's again, part 2 of this classic campaign by the artist Fred Ottness. And I've actually got in the collection an original, which is slightly different, by Fred Ottness, which has all sorts of scenes. There's the Man in Black. There's the Man with No Name on board with lots of kind of whiting out. Haven't quite made up their mind what they're going to do with the lettering and all the rest of it. And this is how he produced his collages. So this is an original piece of artwork by the artist in preparation for the Few Dollars More poster. He was a graphic artist and a magazine illustrator who more and more moved towards gallery work. So in the 70s and 80s, he did a lot of gallery paintings in this collage style, which is very much in the same kind of genealogy, visual genealogy, as his Dollars posters. I actually got this from a dealer who got it from Fred Ottness's family. One of the American lobby cards was this image, the one of Clint Eastwood with the rifle that was used by the French campaign and so on. And this was turned into a very famous poster in the 1960s. This I actually had on my wall as a student at college. And if you can imagine, it's next door to Che Guevara, the famous image of him in his beret, and on the other side, Bob Dylan as John Wesley Harding. And, you know, he was now in the pantheon of those sort of heroes, countercultural heroes of the 1960s. And that's taken from that image of Clint Eastwood holding the rifle. This became the sort of cheaply produced poster that went absolutely everywhere and carried for a few dollars more with it. Here's a few other documents relating to, for a few dollars more, the Japanese book that came out at the same time, obviously picking up on the Japanese poster for a design. German film courier, supplement devoted to the film. Spanish, Death Has Its Price. And this is interesting. This didn't come out for a fistful of dollars, but for a few dollars more, it's a comic strip version of the story produced in Belgium, where they have lots of blow-up photographs from the film with captions. So it's like a comic strip version with lots and lots of stills of the film. And from thereafter, all Leone's films came out in this style. American, part of the press book, Man with No Name is back, American style, the usual thing. I mean, it's now become a big budget promotable movie rather than a small scale hole in corner thing that opened in Florence. I mean, you know, we're into the big league now with this kind of publicity. So like Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More comes out as a single in Italy. La Resa dei Conti, the settling of accounts, sort of trumpet solo, comes out in Italy, comes out in Spain, comes out in Germany, comes out in Japan as a single, 2 versions. Comes out in Spain as an EP with various tracks on it, and it comes out in Germany. And then, of course, in the United States in '67, this comes out, which is the first album of Ennio Morricone to be issued in the United States as a mainstream album. And it's got a fistful of dollars on one side and a thing called the Suite, Fistful of Dollars Suite on the other, which is the same themes remixed in various ways. So they're stretching it. And I don't know why they didn't bring out the double-sided thing of Fistful of Dollars and a Few Dollars More in the States, but they never did. But this is the record that really launched Ennio Morricone into American consciousness, I think. It was a best-selling album, came out in England. And then France, you start getting a double bill of the two by '67, '68, Germany, and then, inevitably, in Japan, the Macaroni Western movies, which is a kind of collection based around the Clint Eastwood films. So the cult of Ennio Morricone, the music as a special aspect of these films, really takes off in '66, '67 with the issue of these records. I got to know a record collector who had collected about half these records, who was a completist, and had to have every album sleeve there was, even if it was on a... And I bought half of it as a ready-made collection, actually, and some of them in bits and bobs. Yes, it's partly how the graphics relate to the publicity campaigns, because very often they simply reproduce the poster on the cover of the album, and partly the variations, and partly how they've remixed the order of the track, all sorts of things like that, because it's all part of the marketing, really. But it's a bit mad, really, because no one plays any vinyl records anymore. But the thing is, when they used to have those 33 records, you could really do graphic design on the sleeves and do something interesting. I mean, when they're this size, you know, I never think it's quite the same thing. So in addition to the big posters, the small posters, the inserts, and the equivalent of lobby cards, they produced 3 of these large-scale, sort of medium-sized posters called soggetti, and one for each of the main characters in the film. And I think they're a beautiful set. The first one is of Gian Maria Volonte as Indio in the final duel scene with the famous stopwatch. The second one in the series is of Lee Van Cleef as Colonel Mortimer. And bearing in mind that Lee Van Cleef had been the sort of walk-on baddie in countless westerns in the 50s, and I think How the West Was Won, he has a non-speaking part. It's amazing to see him as a kind of star presented in this way. So there he is on the other side of the threshing ground, facing El Indio, for the final duel. And for the third of these personality posters, or soggetti, we've had Lee Van Cleef and Gia Maria Volonté, so we now have Clint Eastwood, and he's no longer in the duel sequence at the end of the film, which would have been quite nice with the three of them facing each other. He's in the baddies' den talking to Gia Maria Volonté in a scene earlier in the film, with the poncho, with the cheroot, with the eyes looking in this very determined way. The image of Clint Eastwood as a kind of icon was beginning to gel. And they look as though they're touched up, the colour, you know, whether they're black and white stills blown up and they've hand-coloured them, or whether it's the colour printing process. There's a kind of over-printed look to it that is very much of its period, I think. It doesn't look like realistic colour. So you'd have had all three of them displayed in the foyer, in the lobby of the cinema in Italy when you went to see it. I have the original shooting script For a Few Dollars More. Now, this was given to me by Fulvio Morcella, who was the brother-in-law of Leone's wife, Carla. And Morcella became the producer of, you'll see his name on the credits of all the Leone films, and he had this nice set of the scripts. It's more advanced than the script of For a Fistful of Dollars, but there are some interesting differences. The title had settled as For a Few Dollars More, because having chosen Fistful of Dollars, and they make the follow-up, clearly they had to relate to it, For a Few Dollars More. Originally, the film was called The Bounty Hunter, and then it was called Boot Hill, but eventually they settled on For a Few Dollars More. And there's a few differences. If you remember at the beginning of the film, Lee Van Cleef's sitting on a train, dressed in this black frock coat and a black hat, and he's reading the Bible, and you think he's a reverend for a moment. In the script, he's reading Byron's poems, which is interesting, because he's more of a dandy. You know, he's more of a sort of dilettante kind of figure. You think he's an arty kind of figure rather than a reverend, which is interesting. They hadn't cast Lee Van Cleef yet, so you know they hadn't worked on that image. And a lot of the proper names in here are very spaghetti western. The town is called Silver City, which, if ever there was a spaghetti western name for a town, that's it. You know, Massacre in Silver City, that sort of thing, which eventually became White Rocks. But on the whole, this is more together actually as a script than A Fistful of Dollars. What you get from the script is, you know, you get a description of, say, the final duel, which is about 2 pages. And it just says, you know, they stand in this threshing yard in Albaricoque, which is a little village in Almeria, and close-up of Lee Van Cleef, close-up. What you don't get is that huge sense of scale that Leone would bring to the films when he was actually on the set, you know, that, you know, a tiny paragraph of stage directions turns into this vast kind of landscape with someone standing in the middle of it. And the scriptwriter, Luciano Vincenzoni, whom I got to know quite well, said, you know, he couldn't believe it, that the words that he'd written, when he saw them on the screen, it was pumped up to the power of 10, you know, that it had just sort of magnified, really, because the choice of location, the music, the way in which close-ups were used. So you get tiny little stage directions which become vast kind of moments in the films. And so the script is interesting, but it only really takes you so far. It took Leone on the set to really turn it into a movie.